These are wild tarantulas, and right now they're migrating. And this is just my driveway at my house. And I opened up the garage door. I was getting ready to back my Jeep out, and I seen this guy, and I didn't want to run him over. No, you're not going in the garage. Wrong way. Come on. Oh, that way. Go. Come on, get out of here. Go, yeah, that way. Come on, go, go, go. Yeah, there you go, just like that. Herding tarantulas. In this video, we're gonna go explore a very old mining camp located up in the Rocky Mountains. And this mining camp would probably date to around maybe the Civil War, sometime around that period, the 1860s. It's a very primitive mining camp, so it's very interesting. And we're going to talk about some other stuff, you know, like what did those old guys eat back then? Who was making all the money? Because it dang sure wasn't the prospectors. And how many of those old guys died and were injured back then out here in the wild, wild west. And we'll also take a look at some different rock types. And so it should be a fun video, and I hope you enjoy it. When I first found this, I thought for sure this was an old smelter. And smelters are, think of like primitive ovens, primitive furnaces, where you would melt, you know, gold, silver, and other metals. And this technology, it's very old. Historians don't know exactly what was the first culture to smelt metal, but the consensus is it was your ancient Hittites. And your Hittites were an ancient empire. They lived in Asia Minor, kind of in modern day Turkey. And they were contemporaries of your ancient Egyptians, your ancient Babylonians. They were a very powerful empire. But when I got a closer look at this, I don't believe it's a smelter. I could be wrong, but every smelter I found where they were melting gold and silver, you'll have glazing on the rock, because to melt your gold and silver, you need a very high temperature. And what happens is you get this glassing effect on the rock from that high heat. And I could dig down in here. There's definitely evidence of burning. You can see that, but there's no glazing, not that I can see, at least on the surface. And I don't mess with stuff. I leave stuff how I found it. So the only way to know for sure is you'd have to dig this out and see if there's any glazing down lower, you know, and I'm not going to do that. You know, I'm not going to mess around with it. Another reason I don't believe this was a smelter is all this rock that's kind of crudely stacked up. You would have had clay inserted in here. And the clay would have helped act as an insulator, helping to keep that heat here inside the furnace. And what they would use is, if this was a smelter, is they would use charcoal. And you would have charcoal, that'd be your fuel source. And then you would have like a bellows type system where you could force air into the furnace to bring the temperature up to the desired temperature to melt the gold or silver or whatever you were working with. What I think this is I think this is what you call a masonry oven. And those old miners built this, and this is where they were cooking their food. So this would have been built up, and you up here on the top, you would have had probably some flat rocks or something like that going across. And then you would have like a big iron skillet, possibly two of them sitting here on top. And so this, you know, every day they would have came here, and, you know, they would have been preparing their food, which is still really cool, right? And the kind of food they ate, because you got to remember back then, this was a very remote wilderness. You were out on the frontier. But they would bring supplies with them. And some of the food they would eat rice and beans, salt pork. Salt pork was another food that they'd bring out with them. Another one was called hardtack. And hardtack is it's like a biscuit or a cracker. It's made out of flour and water, and if they're lucky, there'd be some salt in it. But very nasty stuff. I've actually ate some before. It's not very good, but the way it's processed, it can stay preserved for a very long time, and it's so hard. That's why it's called hardtack. That they would have to soak it in water before they could eat it, so it didn't break their teeth. And then, of course, they would supplement their diet with wild game. You know, out in areas like this, they would kill elk, deer, bear. They would catch fish in the nearby streams and river. But that's kind of the main staple of their diet and how they lived. This right here, this is the old Arrastra, and those old miners were using this to crush their ore. If you want to, I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail on this. I did a video not too long ago where I explain all the ins and outs and the mechanics of this. And if you want to learn more, I'll put a link to that video down below in the description. But the basics, this technology, it dates all the way back thousands of years. You know, your ancient Romans were using this, the Phoenicians, and different cultures around the Mediterranean. And then your Spaniards brought this technology from the old world here to the new world with them. And then, of course, your Americans picked up this technology and they were using it like they were right here. And the Americans were building these Arrastras clear up and until the 1890s. But how it worked is you have this ring of rocks. And then sometimes if they had access, they'd have like a big metal band that would go around this ring of rocks to hold everything inside. But more than likely, a remote area like this, they would have had wood. So you'd have wood going up around, being supported by these rings of rock. And then down below, you can't see it because all the sediments filled this in, but you'd have what's called patio stones and these flat rocks. And then in the center right here, you would have had a wooden post, and then you would have had a wooden beam going across the top. And then attached to this wooden beam, you would have two large rocks. And then to power all this, you know, they used horses, mules, donkeys, and, you know, say they had a mule, and the mule would be turning this wooden beam around and around, and it would be dragging these big stones. And so they used a process called amalgamation, and they would crush up all this material. And once they started getting everything all crushed up, they would start to add mercury. Now, a little note on mercury: if you ever want to study stuff like this, just so you know, you're not, like, say you're reading old history books or old newspaper articles and stuff like that, you're never going to come across the word mercury, not used in this context. Back then, they used to call it quicksilver. So nowadays we call it mercury, but back then it's quicksilver, just so you know, if you ever want to study this stuff on your own. So they would introduce the mercury, this amalgamation process, and the mercury would capture your gold and your silver. And then they had different ways to extract the gold or silver from the mercury, using like distillation retorts and stuff like that. So very neat, and it's always fun to find one of these. Right here, we got an old shovel. And man, this thing is old. I'm almost scared to touch it, afraid it's gonna crumble to pieces. But man, this has been sitting here a long time. I imagine it's not going to last too many more years, but that's pretty neat. Now we got one old mine, but it looks like they beat us to it. So this one's been sealed off. It says State of Colorado, Division of Reclamation, Mining and Safety. And it looks like they sealed this one off in 2015. which is a real shame. You know, it sucks to see this, because it's always nice when you can go in and explore and see what those old timers were up to. It's kind of hard to tell, but I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe they were chasing or following Breccia rock, and that's kind of what you see right there in the middle of your screen on the top. From here, it looks like Breccia, and Breccia is a really cool rock, and you can most definitely find mineralization in Breccia. And there's different types of Breccia. A couple of the common types where, you know, the old prospectors and miners were interested in. You have what's called fault Breccia, and how fault Breccia works is you have this fault, you know, this crack in the earth, and then you'll have these two bodies of rock, and one's called the hanging wall, and the other one's called the foot wall. And so these two bodies of rock, right, and you have a crack in the middle, and you'll get these different like tectonic forces, and it'll cause these two bodies of rock to move, you know, so they might move up or they might move down or possibly back and forth over time. And right here where these two bodies of rock make contact, you have a lot of grinding and milling action that occurs, and a lot of the rock is broken off into little fragments. And then usually groundwater will come in and saturate those areas, and of course the groundwater contains minerals, and this will cement all that material together, creating fault Breccia. Another type of Breccia where you can most definitely find good mineralization, and it's called hydrothermal Breccia. And how it works is, you know, kind of the same thing. You have like the seismic activity, and you get these cracks and voids that'll form in the earth. And then you'll have these hydrothermal fluids that'll come in to fill in those areas. And then what happens is, as these fluids enter into those areas, there's a drop in pressure. And so this causes that fluid to flash. You know, you have this intense boiling of that fluid. So this fluid's very hot. It's under a lot of pressure. And as it makes contact with the rock, you have a process called hydrofracturing that'll occur, and it'll break off. You have this fracturing of the rock. So you have all these little pieces of rock that are mixing in with this hydrothermal fluid. And then what happens is, as things start to calm down, you know, and this fluid starts to cool off, these minerals in this hydrothermal fluid, they'll start to precipitate, and they'll come out of solution, and they'll end up cementing all this material together, creating hydrothermal Breccia. And of course, these hydrothermal fluids that are coming up, they have the potential to be bringing up gold, silver, and other desirable minerals up with it. Since we're talking about Breccia, I just want to show you a couple of rocks real quick, and then we'll get back to that old mining camp and see what those old timers were up to. But right here, these are two different types of rocks. Right here, this is a conglomerate type rock, and this is Breccia. And they're created in a similar way, so they're very similar. And a lot of times it's easy to get the two confused. So I'm going to show you an easy way to tell these apart. But we'll start the conglomerate. And so I found this near a very old Spanish Arrastra, where the Spaniards had been taking their ore and they were crushing it up. And in this area, all the rock is typically granite and some pegmatite and stuff like that. And so this was poking out of the ground. It was next to an ant pile, maybe about 100 feet from the old Arrastra. And so it really stood out. You know, I seen it and I thought, well, that doesn't belong there. And so I dug it out, and this has some quartz mixed in with it. And right here, like this is a piece of quartz. And when I first dug this out and I got cleaned off, you know, it was a real sunny day. The sun was out, it was very bright. And you could just see what looked like little gold nuggets in here, just shimmering, you know, they're very bright. And I thought for sure that this was a piece of gold ore that the Spaniards were taking down that Arrastra to crush up, you know, and this had fallen out of a pack saddle or something like that. So I was all excited, you know, just for the historical value to have you know, like an artifact like that from those old Spaniards, you know, that they'd been taken to that mill to crush. You know, that's really cool. But I pulled out the loop and I took a closer look at it, and it was just fool's gold. So I got fooled. You know, it was just some very beautiful pyrite. But you'll notice in this rock, you have all this gray colored material, and that's what's called the matrix. And it's like a really fine grained material, usually like silt or clay or something like that. And then all the rocks and the minerals, the larger pieces that are embedded into the matrix, that's what you call the clast. And so the clast is embedded into the matrix. And so when you're studying rocks or geology or something like that, sometimes you'll come across a term and it'll be clastic sedimentary rock. And this is what they're referring to. And most of your sedimentary rock is of the clastic type, but it's because of these clasts that are embedded into the matrix, you know, which is creating an entirely new rock. And the clast, all these rocks and minerals in your conglomerate type rock, you'll notice they're very rounded. They'll have smooth edges. And that's because all this material got transported a very long distance before being cemented together. And so you have a lot of erosion occurring. Either that or the material was transported and it was reworked. And reworked means, like, say you had some rocks and they got transported along to some ancient seashore. Then you had the waves coming in and hitting on these rocks, and these rocks are like banging into each other, you know, and that would be, you know, erosion would be occurring. And that'd be an example of material being reworked. But your conglomerate type rock, the clast that make up the rock, all the bigger pieces of rock, they're always going to be more eroded because they've been transported a further distance from the source. Now, this is breccia, and breccia is the same thing. You have clast and you have your matrix, but the only difference is your breccia, all of the clast, you know, your bigger pieces of rock or mineral, they've only traveled a short distance from the source, and so there's very little erosion. And so the material that makes up your breccia, it's going to be more like angular shaped. You're going to have more sharper edges. It's not going to be as rounded. And on this piece of breccia, this came from the Uinta Mountains in northeastern Utah. My dad found this, and there's a certain ridge in the Uinta Mountains. And if you know where to look, there's some really good mineralization that you can find. And there's two very old, probably from the late 1700s, early 1800s, Spanish mines that are up on this ridge. And I've been to both of them. They're both collapsed, so you can't go into them. And if you go up further up the ridge, you'll start to come across some limestone. And this limestone will have some very beautiful marine fossils embedded in the limestone, fossils that are very well preserved. But it's a really neat area, and that's where this rock came from. And so I'm just going to kind of turn it for you. And most of the material in here, most of your clast, not all of it, most of it is quartz. So you can almost say this is like a brecciated quartz. But like, see, all of this material just kind of irregularly sorted in here, not very eroded. This is all quartz. And right here, all this material, this white material, this is all calcite. And then right here, this gray material that you have, this is called galena, and this is where you get lead from, and it'll contain small amount of silver. And it's my understanding, like most of your modern day galena mines, they actually make more money from the silver than they do the actual lead. And then as you rotate this over, and for the rest of this, you have to have a loop. You can't see it with the naked eye, but embedded in here, you have some pyrite, some beautiful pyrite crystals, perfectly cubed. And pyrite is an iron sulfide type mineral. There's also what appears to be chalcopyrite, and chalcopyrite is where we get copper from. And then on some of the quartz, if I remember, I think it's this piece right here and this piece, there's some, they're very small, but two small flakes of gold embedded in the quartz. And in here, like, you have some iron oxide staining on this, but if I was to etch this, say I used like vinegar, something like that that wouldn't destroy the calcite, and I cleaned off all that iron oxide, there's a good chance I'd probably find some more gold flake embedded in these pieces of quartz. So in this little tiny piece of brecciated rock, you know, if you think about it, we have lead, we have silver, we have iron, we have copper, and we have gold. Just to give you an example of the type of mineralization that you can find in Breccia. Starting to get a little bit cold out here, but the natural beauty definitely makes up for it. A couple of the questions I'll usually get from people is, the first one is they'll want to know if I've ever seen a Bigfoot, you know, out in the wild places like this. And in all my travels, I've never seen a Bigfoot. I've never seen evidence of Bigfoot, you know, like tracks or anything like that. But if I ever do see a Bigfoot or Bigfoot tracks, I'll most definitely document it and I'll put it on this channel. But as of now, I've never seen evidence of Bigfoot out here in the wild. Another question I'll get is people want to know if I pack a gun with me. And I do pack a gun. I have it on me right now. You know, I'm not going to show it, but I have a gun. And I'm going to show you a couple of pictures. And if you're sensitive to, they're a little bit graphic. So if you're sensitive to that kind of stuff, you might want to fast forward past this part. But these pictures you're looking at, this is my brother's nephew through marriage. And him and his buddy were attacked by a bear 2 years ago up in Wyoming. And, you know, they got messed up pretty good. They both survived, and, you know, someday they'll have an amazing story to tell their grandkids. And I show you those pictures not to scare you, but just to show you, you know, like how much damage a bear can do really quickly. And I used to never carry a gun until about 4 years ago. And I was in an area called Willow Creek in northeastern Utah. A very beautiful area, very remote. And I was just out hiking around, and I was looking for petroglyphs, old homesteads, stuff like that. And what I did is I was hiking, and I'd hiked up and I kind of made a loop like that. And then I came back onto, you know, where I'd been just a few hours earlier. And what I noticed real quickly is I looked down the dirt and I would see my tracks, you know, they were just a few hours old. And then following me was a bear, a big bear. They were big tracks. And a lot of times his tracks would be literally right on top of my tracks. And if I went that way, the bear went that way. If I went that way, the bear went that way. So the bear was most definitely following me. Now, whether the bear wanted to eat me or he was just curious, I had no idea, but I had absolutely no way of defending myself. And so what I did is I grabbed a big stick and I grabbed a rock. So I had a stick in one hand and a rock in the other hand. And that was all I had to defend myself. And this area where I was at, it was very thick. It was very thick with brush. You couldn't see very far. And I thought at any moment, you know, a bear was gonna rush me, come out of the bushes and attack me. And I was paranoid. You know, I'll admit it, I was scared. the whole hike, and I had about a 2-hour hike back to my Jeep. But I made it back to the Jeep. I didn't have any issues. I never even saw the bear. But on the drive home, you know, I promised myself that I'd never put myself in that situation again. And ever since then, when I'm in areas like this, you know, I most definitely carry a gun with me. Another thing you got to watch out for is lions, mountain lions. When I was a kid, there was a guy, and he was on a horse, and if I remember right, he was checking on his cattle, and he was on his horse, and he had his dog. He had a blue heeler dog, and what happened is he was riding along, and there were some rocks up to the left of him, and there was a lion in these rocks waiting to ambush him. And he didn't see the lion until it was too late. And what ended up happening is he was on his horse, and this lion jumped out of the rocks and grabbed a hold of him. And of course, the momentum from the lion, you know, knocked him off the horse. And what ended up happening was quite remarkable. And the horse and the dog teamed up against the lion. And so the horse, you know, was trying to kick the lion. The dog was doing its dog thing and trying to attack the lion. And of course, the guy, you know, he was picking up rocks, stuff like that, and throwing at the lion. And between the guy, his horse, and his dog, they were able to fight off and scare away the lion. So he was very lucky. I've only seen lions, to be honest, just very few times, literally just a handful of times out here in the wild. And every time that I've seen a lion, they've taken off running. They just wanted to get away from me. Yeah, they never messed with me. The only, I guess it wasn't an encounter, but it's kind of creepy experience with the lion was about 8 years ago. And I was with my brother, some family and friends, and we were doing an overnight fishing trip on the Green River in northeastern Utah. And we'll do that about once a year. It's a lot of fun. And we'll take boats down the river, then we'll just pick a sandbar, and we just bring sleeping bags, and we just sleep out on the sandbar and catfish and just sleep under the stars. And, you know, we'll have alcohol, so we'll be drinking and stuff like that. And so when we all went to sleep, you know, and you could say, you know, from the alcohol, we were in a deep sleep, and we were sitting there sleeping away in our sleeping bags. And the next morning when we woke up, there was lion tracks all around us in the sand. And so while we were there sleeping, a lion had came in and had just walked among us. You know, while we were snoring away, he was probably sniffing us and stuff like that. But he was just curious. He was just checking us out one by one. And he didn't mess with us. He didn't even mess with our food. He was just curious, checked us out, and then he left. And the way I view it is, you know, when you're out in areas like this is their home. You know, they belong here. I don't. And I always keep that in mind. So like the gun, that's something, you know, it'd most definitely be a last resort. But that being said, if I was you and you like doing stuff like this, I would most definitely recommend that you bring a gun, or at least some bear spray. I got a dead snake. That scared me. Thought it was a live one. And right here, we have the old structure where they were living. And there's two of these, and they're both the same, both made out of rock. But this is really neat. And look at how thick these walls are. This would keep them nice and cool in the summer and warm in the winter. That's a lot of good insulating value, but very neat. I always wish like I had a time machine and I could just go back in time and hang out with these guys and just listen to their stories. And man, that would be so neat. And just see, you know, how they lived, what they talked about, what they dreamed about. Be very cool. One thing I've noticed, and it's a common pattern that I've seen over and over again. This whole area where I'm at, I mean, you got pine trees everywhere. Nice pine trees that could make, you know, a beautiful log cabin. But I've noticed these old miners, anytime they had good rock to work with, they chose to build their structures out of rock and not wood. The only exception is when I'm in areas where you don't have good rock to build with. In those areas, they'll build log cabins. But anytime they have good rock to build with, they always choose to build with rock. And you know, if you think about it, it makes sense. You know, because these guys, they were masons, right? They worked with rock. And so it just came natural to them. And that's probably why, you know, they chose to build with rock. But very cool, very neat. And this one, man, they did some thick walls. And that's probably, God, I don't know, maybe 3 feet thick. But very, very impressive. This right here, this is the old trail that those miners were using. And this is old, you know, if you think about it, this was being used like 150, 160 years ago, back during the time of the American Civil War. There had been men going up and down this trail every day. And so when you follow this trail, you can follow it and then you kind of lose it for a bit, and then you can pick it up again and then you'll kind of lose it. And this will take you clear up the side of the mountain, and it'll take you to the area where I believe their old mine is located, and that's where we're headed right now. The California Gold Rush. That was the largest mass migration event in the United States history. And for that reason, it's been very well documented. It's not difficult to find information on the California Gold Rush. Now, the other gold rushes, you know, it's kind of iffy. Sometimes it's very hard to get detailed information. And so, during the California Gold Rush, historians don't know the exact number, but they estimate around 8,000 men died and around 24,000 men were severely injured or crippled. And what they mean by that is, say, like you had some cliff over here and a prospector up there looking for mineral outcroppings, and he falls off the cliff and breaks his back. Or you had a couple of guys drift mining, and the tunnel collapses, and one of the guys, you know, both of his legs get crushed. Those would be examples of like severe injuries or crippling type events. And so I think it's safe to assume, and this is just my assumption, but you could probably easily double or triple those numbers if you factor in the other gold rushes, like in Colorado, Montana, New Mexico, Arizona, even the Klondike. And so to put that in perspective, or another way of looking at it, the same amount of men were either killed or suffered severe injuries out here in the West during the gold rush as American soldiers who were killed during the Vietnam War. So, you know, it'd be right around 60,000 men. And that's a lot of people. Throughout my life, I found when I've been out exploring the mountains and deserts, I've found old graves. Not very many, but I have found some here and there. One time I found what looked like 2 children. They were very small graves and they're buried side by side. And I think they were homesteaders, because I found a homestead site not very far from there. So a lot of these graves that I found, you know, they could be Indian graves, they could be mountain man graves, they could be pioneer graves, but I imagine a lot of them, or some of them, were probably old prospectors. And you know, of course, back then there's no cemetery or anything like that. So, you know, if you were out here by yourself, wherever you died, you know, the animals would just come and scatter your bones or whatever. If you happen to be with some buddies, you know, then they would just generally bury you in the area where you died. And so for all that hardship that those prospectors went through and those old miners, you would think they made a lot of money, right? But they didn't. In fact, most of them just lived hand to mouth. The money they did make was typically spent at the saloon or the whorehouse in wherever the nearest boomtown happened to be. But most of the money went to the merchants. So here's some figures for you, and this is based on the California gold rush during the peak. All right, those old prospectors, for one egg, one simple egg, they'd pay upwards of $25. And these numbers are adjusted for inflation, so they're in today's dollars. For one pound of coffee, they'd pay upwards of $100. And get this, for one pair of boots, just a simple pair of leather boots, they'd pay upwards of $2,500. So that right there tells you who was making the money. And it dang sure wasn't your old prospectors or miners who were risking their lives every day. This area we're at right now, we're about halfway up the mountain. And this is the area, the general area, where I believe their old mine was located. And I'll tell you why I believe that. All right, see this tree right here? This is called a Rocky Mountain juniper. And there's very few of them up here. Most of the trees are all pine trees. But these juniper trees, they'll live to be about 250, 300 years old. They're classified as a softwood, but they're a very hard softwood. And for the most part, on average, these junipers are about 35% harder than all these pine trees around us. And what you'll see is you start getting into this area, all of these trees that have been cut very long time ago, old axe cut trees, all of these, every single one is a juniper tree. They did not even touch the pine trees. And the reason for that is they wanted these juniper trees to use as mining timbers because it's a lot stronger wood. It would help to support the rock. And I actually found somewhere up here, when I came up here last time, and I spent a lot of time up here searching for the mine, and I came across an area where they had taken these juniper trees and they were actually splitting them with a wedge or an axe, and they were making boards to use in their old mine. I wasn't able to find the mine. I mean, look, here's more. These junipers in this area that they cut are everywhere, and they cut almost every single one of them down. So they were definitely somewhere in this area. But the mine, you know, this area, it's a big area and it's very thick. You got a lot of little nooks and crannies, and there's a good chance that the mine is just covered over. And that happens, especially when you get up in these mountain areas. The mountain kind of gets a little steeper. It's very thickly covered with brush and trees, and you can kind of see you have cliffs that go all the way around you. This is kind of like a big valley when you get up in here. And I imagine there's probably a good chance, especially if it was a vertical shaft, you know, you had like mudslides, avalanches, rock slides, stuff like that. And when you get those types of events, those sedimentary type events like that, you know, you can literally cover over an old mine in just a matter of minutes, and it'll just be covered over, you know, a thick deposit of sediment. And there's a good chance that that's, you know, what's happened with this one. I even looked on Google Earth and looked for an old mine dump, and I couldn't find one, but it's kind of hard because, you know, on Google Earth, when you zoom into this area, all you can see is like the tree canopy and the bushes, so you can't even really see the dirt. But I plan on coming back here again, and, you know, if I do find the mine, I'll definitely document it and throw it on the channel. But, you know, doing stuff like this, just finding the old evidence and trying to follow the clues, you know, that's really why I do it, and that's fun for me. You know, if you find the mine, that's like icing on the cake, right? That's just an added bonus. But I just enjoy being out here. I hope you found value in the video, and I hope you enjoyed it. And do me a favor, when you find these old sites, don't mess with them looking for scraps of gold or silver. It's not worth it. Once you destroy these old sites, they're gone forever. There's no getting them back. And you'd be amazed how many sites I found over the years that have been destroyed by reckless people. And, you know, the mountains, the deserts, the site themselves, these are the real treasure. These are worth way more than gold or silver, trust me. And with that being said, as always, thanks, and until next time.